Hello, this is the Lockpicker 1969 and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to share how I do etching on locks. Whether they're challenge locks or my favorite locks, etching them doesn't have to be a complicated task really. It's a pretty straightforward process and no special machines or tools are necessary to do this. The process is simple and fast and is known as electrolytic etching. The etching is made without the use of polluting or poisonous chemicals. Only salt water and energy are used. I do want to make one warning of note. This process does produce some gases with some metals, albeit very little. Performing this process in a well-ventilated area is very well advised. So, what do you need to do this etching process? Well, first you need a 9-volt battery. You'll need a saltwater solution. Mine is approximately, I filled this container here 25% with salt and poured hot water into the container and then mixed it up really well until the salt was dissolved. You'll also need 2 wires with alligator clips at the very least. And you'll essentially need Q-tips, and really that's all that's necessary to do this process other than your metal. You'll also want removable vinyl or electrical tape, although I find the removable vinyl much easier to work with and it produces much better results. You also will want to have paper towel handy to wipe the surface off when you decide it's etched sufficiently. So with your power source, as I said earlier, a 9-volt battery and your alligator clips and wires will be sufficient. You can easily hook up them to the terminals. And they slip off, but that's why I'm going to suggest the next thing here. And then essentially the red lead goes to and connects to your surface that you're going to be treating, and the black is used to hold the Q-tip, and I'll be demonstrating this process later in the video, and essentially then apply the solution to the metal surface that you're treating. Now what I did was I took this kind of to a different level because I wanted the power source to be connected to pretty reliably. So I took essentially a 9-volt battery clip, some red and black electrical wire, as well as some alligator clips, and then essentially created my own setup that allows me to not worry about the battery becoming disconnected, and then I essentially can just worry about the 2 alligator clips during the process. So now I want to talk a little bit about your metals or surfaces that you're going to want to try etching. Careful consideration should be given to the metals or items that you want to etch. This process works best on steel, copper, and brass. It will work on other metals as well, but be careful to do this process in a well-ventilated area, as I indicated earlier, as a slight amount of gas is created during the process. Some locks, as well as other metals, have a protective surface on them, similar to this master lock. You can tell it has a dull surface on it. This surface must be buffed off or sanded off before etching will take to the surface. I utilize a Dremel and a different buffing wheels before performing the process. So once I can clearly see the metal and it looks shiny, where it used to look more dull like this, I know the surface is ready. I use different buffing wheels, starting with a more abrasive one to start, then moving to less abrasive to remove scratches as much as possible and bring a nice shine to the metal. If you're working with a metal that does not have a protective coating on it, you should still apply a high grit sandpaper to it to remove anything from the surface to prepare it for this process. It will increase your success in applying your etching to that surface. I use 1000 grit for such surfaces and just give it a light sanding. Use your own best judgment on how much sanding you feel is necessary to make sure you have a clean surface. Do make sure to wipe off the surface with a clean lint-free cloth when you are done sanding and right before you start the process. Please be aware that some metals may have other metals blended in and cause you to experience coloration of the metal. Unfortunately, I have found no way to avoid this, and unfortunately, once you've started etching and the colors come out, the only way to return the surface to normal is to buff and sand the entire layer affected by the process and start over, or pass on trying to etch that metal altogether. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to demonstrate buffing off this protective surface from this lock to prepare it to do the etching. I'm running my Dremel at about 20,000 RPM, so let's get to it. So what I'm seeing here is that I need to go with a more coarse buffer wheel, which I'll switch to. Now I'm not going for perfection here because I'm doing this for demonstration purposes, but you would go through this process as much as you wanted to get the surface as shiny as you want to get it, with as few scratches as you want to have on the surface. I am wearing face protection because you do get little bits that come off the wheel, and you don't want those going in your eye. Oh, battery died. And let's continue. And as you can see, the protective layers coming off as the metal gets shinier. And as I get closer to what I really want, I'll go to a softer wheel to try and get it a bit shinier. But as I said already, I'm not going to go too overboard with that for the sake of brevity. We'll go with that one. There we go. And last but not least, just go over it with the wheel. Normally I'd go over it quite a bit more, but for the sake of moving along here, just wipe the surface off. And this will be the area that we do our etching on. Normally you could do the entire lock and so on and so forth, but that's not necessary for this demonstration. Masking is the process of covering up all the areas of the metal surface you do not want etched or treated by the electrolytic process. Only those areas that come in contact with the salt water and the Q-tip will be affected. Masking can be done in different ways, such as using electrical tape. You can also use other types of tape. This is painter's tape, this is masking tape. As long as it's covering it and it's, the salt water won't go through the tape. So then essentially you cover the area, you use a typically like an X-Acto knife or something like that to cut your design into the tape, and that will be what's called the negative masking, which exposes the metal that you're going to treat. I will not be showing that method, as I prefer another method which I feel produces much better results. I work with removable vinyl, so I perform working with this because it's a lot more exact. There's a lot of ways to utilize vinyl, and it can be obtained from most arts and crafts stores. Think Michael's or Joann's Fabrics. If you happen to have a vinyl cutting machine like a Cricut, then you will most likely already be familiar with how to make removable vinyl applications. If you do not have a machine, simply put some vinyl onto a cutting board and use an X-Acto knife like you can do with the tape. And preferably you want an X-Acto knife with a lot of precision to cut out your design. The negative spaces you cut out will be where the etching will happen on the metal. Once you have cut out your design, you will need transfer tape, also available at arts and craft stores, to put over the top of the vinyl when you are ready to apply the vinyl, and you'll be removing the backing from the vinyl in order to then apply it to your surface. Once it's applied to the surface, and I'll be showing this later in the video, once it's applied to the surface, you'll remove the top layer of the transfer tape, and the vinyl will remain on the object that you're going to be doing the etching on. I could go into a lot of detail here, but suffice to say there are a lot of videos on YouTube explaining how to create your own vinyl applications. Alright, so we're going to perform the actual process. First things first, I did do a bit of sanding using 1000 grit sandpaper on the surface just to kind of finish it off a little bit. I've got my salt water, I've got my Q-tip, my battery supply, and my vinyl. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the backing from this vinyl so that I can get just the vinyl and the transfer tape. But to prepare the surface, what you want to do is just go over it with even your fingernail, because all these little pieces in the vinyl, like in the numbers and so forth and some letters, they tend to want to stick to the backing when you try to peel it away, and by going over it with your fingernail it'll help keep that down. So let's give this another go here. See if we can get this to pull apart nicely for us. Yeah, I got some pieces sticking, and I'm just trying to keep it up a little bit, and I'll go back over it with my finger, my nail of my finger, to try to get it to sit and stay on the transfer tape and not stick to the backing. Just does not want to stay on there. Okay, so that's come off, and next we're going to apply the vinyl right to the surface where I want to do the etching. And it's very important you take great care in placing your vinyl down, because once it's down it's going to be very hard to remove it again. So once it's on the surface, I'm going to go over it again just with the top of my nail, because you don't want to use actually the actual tip of your fingernail, because it could risk cutting the vinyl, which you don't want. because that'll expose the surface of the lock through the vinyl, which, you know, that's what you're trying to avoid. So once I get that down, what I'll try to do here is remove the actual transfer tape. It can be a bit tricky. There we go. And you want to be careful that none of the vinyl comes up with it. I had it, and now it laid back down again. Another little trick I have learned doing this that unfortunately I didn't grab before I started this is you can use shims. They also kind of help you get between the layers and help you peel back the transfer tape. There we go. There. Now the vinyl has been left on the lock, so we can actually begin the process here. So I've already got my battery connected. I'm going to use the positive to basically come in contact with the surface. I'm going to be using the black lead to hold my Q-tip. I'm going to dip the Q-tip in the salt water solution, get it good and wet, put that into the clip, make sure the clip is touching the wet part of the Q-tip, touch the metal surface, and then start pressing that against. Now, what you're going to see on the surface and on the Q-tip is it bubbles. The bubbles mean that you're having a reaction with the salt water against the metal, and those are the gases that I was talking about earlier that you want to be careful of. Be in a well ventilated area. My shop is well ventilated. And I'm just going over every inch, pressing the Q-tip. Now, once you get everything saturated and you get some of the solution on all the open exposed areas, I typically just hold down the Q-tip for a short bit on each area. And when you start to see bubbles on the Q-tip, which is hard to see in this video, but that's, you know, you can move on and start doing that to another area. The bubbles are very small. They're hard to see unless you're really looking at the Q-tip. Now normally I would go over the metal and the lettering or the design multiple times, but to keep this video short, I'm going to probably not go to that level with this time. Really, this video is to give you an idea of what you could do. I tend to go over these areas many times until I start actually seeing what's called a the salt water looks almost like cloudy, and that's essentially some of the metal and the gas is coming off. And what I'll do is I'll rub the surface with the Q-tip, which helps continue the process. And what you'll notice is that the Q-tip itself is getting discolored. That's the metal coming off, and the electrolytic process at work. And for the sake of brevity, I'll speed up this process as I finish this up. I'll speed up the video. Alright, that's probably good enough. As you can see, the Q-tip is quite quite filthy. So what I'll do now is just take, I'm using a Kleenex, I'm just going to wipe the surface off a little bit. Then what I'll do is I'll peel back the vinyl to remove it. Scrape away any little pieces of the vinyl that get left behind. Now, what I would typically do after this is take some metal polish in a small buffing cloth and just clean up the surface a little bit, but this was a rushed etching, so it didn't come out as clearly as I would have liked. If I had done it a lot longer, it probably would have come out very, very clearly like I've done on many other locks, but this is essentially what it looks like. That's your final in this process anyways, for as long as I did it for. But as I said, I'd clean it up with some metal polish and hopefully it's good to go. And you know, the good thing is, if you don't like the results, you can always take the sandpaper and the 1000 grit sandpaper back to this surface, clean up the surface again, and then, you know, do the process again. But anyways, that's electrolytic etching. I hope this was useful to some people. Thank you for watching.